I'm Shamaya. It's like papaya, except it's not. And welcome back to Plot Twist, Please. It is so sunny outside. I'm like, is it fall? I mean, here's the thing. We almost skipped fall and went straight into winter, and I got a little scared. It was a little scary for me, you know? But I'm so glad to know that we're back on track to having a little bit of fall, even if it's only for a couple days, because tomorrow it's supposed to be like 60 degrees in Chicago, and I'm excited about it. How many of you are going to like not leave 50 feet from your home still? Me is me. I'm talking about me. Here's the thing. My body isn't quarantined, but my mind still is. I don't know what to do about that. We're working it out. We're working it out, fam. I wanted to talk about something really specific to being neurodivergent. And I'm really starting to gear my content more toward neurodivergent and BIPOC wellness, because I feel like there are a lot of things that affect us specifically that other people don't have to deal with. So why not? I'm still so blown away that people actually want to hear me talk. And that's going to have something to do with what we're going to talk about in today's episode. And by we, I mean me. I don't know why I keep saying we as if there's more than one of us on here. Next time I'll have a really exciting guest. It's going to be a juicy one. I'm going to talk about the concept of someone being a good person and what that actually does in terms of setting an expectation for people, for humans, and for famous humans. And I'm going to talk about that with one of my good friends, Brittany. She always has such gems. She's one of the smartest people I know. Anywho, that's going to be the next podcast episode. So today we're going to talk about neurodivergence and the feeling of not being real and how that can really infiltrate your sense of self, and how to get out of that after years of living under that weight. I feel like the feeling of being real, quote, quote, or not real, is something that a lot of neurodivergent people can relate to, whether you have OCD or you're autistic or you have ADHD, etc. I think that a lot of us can identify with this aspect of not feeling real, not feeling like we are a part of the larger communities that we live among, and like not feeling like we're part of society at large. And a lot of that is systemic, is the effect that I think happens over time of living under a system that devalues you through media, through its principles, through its overall principles, and just through it, how administrations treat you and don't consider you when making decisions, and how lawmakers don't consider you or your needs. Because let's stop pretending like laws are these stagnant entities. Like, people make them. They are fluid things that people can change at any point in time when they decide to. Of course, it's more complicated than one person deciding, I want to give people with disabilities rights, or people who are of color, or people of color rights. Like, it's more than that, and it's more complicated than that. I'm not being obtuse here. That being said, it's not impossible, and these policies are constantly ebbing and flowing and changing based on society's needs and based on society's communicated needs. And what people have communicated, particularly neurodivergent people or disabled people, what we have communicated is that our needs are not being met. Still crickets. They're crickets. I don't know why. I mean, I know why, because money, but anywho. These systemic aspects can affect you as an individual. You can try to circumvent those things, even though it is so hard in your everyday life and in developing a strong, secure sense of self, even within these systems. So when I'm talking about the feeling of not being real, what I'm actually referring to is the idea that your thoughts, your actions don't matter, and that they solely exist within you as a means of providing other people comfort or joy or entertainment or enlightenment, and that you are not an individual on your own. You're not an agent of yourself. You are just an accessory to other people's happiness, to other people's lives. Though I feel like those kinds of terms are kind of overplayed right now, I couldn't relate to anything as much as I related to feeling like not being the main character of my own story, of my own life. And I think that a lot of neurodivergent people, particularly autistic people, because I'm speaking from the autistic experience, can relate to that sentiment. Honestly, that starts with childhood bullies. A lot of us, if you're neurodivergent, particularly if you're autistic, and from now on, I'll pretty much refer to the autistic experience because that's the only experience that I can speak from. This episode today, that's what I'm going to do. So if you grow up being autistic, a lot of the time you don't understand yourself, especially if you're undiagnosed. You don't understand why you feel the things you feel, or you don't feel the things that other people seem to be feeling or exuding, why you communicate the way that you do, why you seem to not understand how other people are communicating, or how to bridge that gap. Other social cues and social rules that everyone else seems to grasp and seems to be able to move so fluidly through. It's just so stark and confusing to you. And so that often makes you the subject of bullying, of toxic dynamics, toxic friendships, toxic relationships. And a lot of the time, either bully people we feel we need to please, or our own friends, people we call our friends, will make us feel lesser than, will belittle us either subtly or directly, either with saying you are literally an idiot, or laughing at you when you walk down the hallway, or refusing to sit with you at lunch, or sitting with you at lunch, but having a sense of I'm doing you a favor. It has the same effects. No, it is not you calling us stupid or calling us the R word, but it is you having an opinion of us that is really reflective in your actions. It's the infantilization. And if you don't know what infantilization is, basically, it's when someone treats an adult or someone who is their peer as if they are younger than them or are less capable than them. That stuff we internalize over a long period of time, and it sucks. It sucks. And it really starts to encroach on who you become as a person and who you view yourself as. So a lot of us move through a large part of our lives not knowing who we are, what we want, what we like, because we've been so trained in order to escape the bullies, to try and attempt to find genuine friendships, genuine connections with people who we can relate to, quote, quote, basically be pretending to relate to you because we can't really relate to you. We change who we are, or we hide who we are, which is often in a tactic called masking. What we'll also use is mirroring, where if somebody does some sort of physical action or has some sort of mannerism, we will mimic that mannerism because we want to also seem normal, quote, quote. We want to seem like we get it, and if we don't get it or we appear to not get it, then people will either ostracize us, patronize us, or make fun of us overtly. And so this is an experience that many people can attest to, whether or not they are diagnosed. But if they are not diagnosed, it can be even more severe and extremely difficult to navigate those situations because you don't have a thing to name. You just feel odd and you just feel different. Like, for example, if your special interest, and by special interest, I mean the thing that you gravitate toward most, the thing that you just want to ham up and you want to know everything about. Like if there's a boy band that you're into, or if there's an era of history that you're into, you will know everything about that era, from the famous people to the not famous people in the history books, the people who have national or international recognition and the people who don't. Like you'll know about the events that everyone knows about and the events that people don't know about. You'll know about what the favorite clothing or the food during that time was. You might make that your favorite clothing or favorite food, or that might become a big part of your personality. And that in itself is enough to ostracize you, especially in high school, especially in middle school. Like, these are things that people find in common with one another in order to gain friendships, in order to build those connections in your primary years. And if you don't have those connections to form because you don't share those similarities, like if everyone is into a boy band and you're not, you're not going to make very many friends because you don't have much in common with these people. Or you're going to have very superficial friendships, which honestly doesn't feel any better than being alone. I honestly would have rather, and I do wonder if other autistic people feel this way or other neurodivergent people feel this way, but I would have much rather have had no friends than have had friends who only were my friends because they thought I needed them, or because they thought I didn't have other options. Because it's like, nice is different than good, Just because you are doing something that seems kind, maybe you're only doing it for you, or maybe you're only doing it so that you feel good about yourself. Maybe it's not for that other person, because you're not actually being genuine. It feeds into this idea of us feeling like pets that really just starts to wear on us as people. If someone treats us like a pet our whole lives, odds are we're going to feel like a pet for a long time, and we're not going to realize that we can step into that agency, that we can disagree with people, that we could disagree. It took a really long time for me to be like, oh, I overtly disagree with what you just said to me, or I am uncomfortable with what you just did, or I have an opinion. And that might sound really strange to the people who aren't neurodivergent in the audience right now, but it is really hard to develop a sense of what you like when you are so trained and you are so into the habit of teaching yourself to like things you don't actually like. And anyone who's a person of color, I think, might understand this experience as well. It's like it's almost like developing and I hate to say slave mentality, but it's a very real thing. And someone said it more intelligently than I can right now, but there's a phrase, not slavery mindset, because people weaponize that. I don't like that. I don't like it. So let me use a different phrase. I'm gonna have to link it in the YouTube comments, or in the YouTube description, as well as the podcast description. But there is a term that is used to describe what happens when you are used to being treated as a slave and you internalize that. Everything that you do becomes a means of survival or to appealing to the person in power. It's a feeling of being inferior. It's a feeling of needing to be controlled in order to be safe, in order to survive. I really wish that people would talk about this more when talking about wellness. It's not just you fighting against the system, it's you fighting against yourself. And as a neurodivergent person, as an autistic person, I have constantly have to fight against myself. And I think that a lot of you out there can also attest to that experience. Feeling not real is basically like constantly having to fight against yourself to validate your existence to yourself. And so it's really hard to know what exactly you want, what exactly you need, because you're so out of touch with yourself. And if you're out of touch with yourself, how are you going to tell somebody else what you need or what you want? How are you going to have a boundary if you don't know that you can have a boundary, or you don't know how to establish a boundary, if you don't know how to know how you feel when a boundary is being crossed, if you have no language, like it's not even about having the language to describe what your boundary is or having the language to communicate with other people what your boundary is. It's not being able to identify that boundary within yourself because your boundaries have so often been crossed. It's like, say you grow up every single day with being pinched by a caretaker or, someone in your circle, and then people, like strangers, started pinching you. You wouldn't think anything of it because that's just what happens. You're just like, this is what happens. This is reality. I get pinched. That's what happens. And so when someone finally asks you if it's okay to pinch you, you're like, what? What do you mean? Of course, and then a process happens where you're like, wait a minute. Should it be okay for everyone to pinch me? Am I okay with people pinching me? How do I feel? And it's not until someone asks you what your boundary is, a lot of the time, if you're neurodivergent, or particularly if you're autistic, it's not until someone asks you about your boundary or if something's okay or how you feel that you actually think that you should feel a certain way. And this is really hard to explain, so I'm trying to make this really accessible. Another example is if you have always been fed beans for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, in your household, and then when you go out into the world, everyone serves you beans. The one time that someone serves you pizza, you're confused. It's almost like you can't compute. It's like boop, boop, beep, boop, can't compute. What's going on? Why is someone serving me pizza when I've always been served beans? You realize that you don't necessarily have to eat beans every day for every meal. And here's the thing, it's not that instantaneous either. It's often throughout a large chunk of time that you start to realize that you have agency and that you have choices, and choices that you can make that aren't dependent on other people's expectations of you or other people's comfortability levels with you. And I really wish that people would stop talking about confidence or self-love as if it's this instantaneous thing that just happens. Like it's this bibbidi bobbidi boo, you now love yourself, or you are now confident because someone told you an affirmation or because someone gave you a compliment. It's almost like something that would happen with me a lot was that I would have low self-esteem, and people I think would sense it and would try to give me a compliment. I didn't receive it well, or I thought that they were lying to me to make me feel good about myself because I knew that they knew that I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. And so I would brush it off as them just trying to be nice. And a lot of the time what would happen is people would get frustrated with me. They would be like, Chamaya, why don't you get it? Like, why don't you get that you're good at this thing or that you're not awful? Like, why don't you understand that? And it's like, this isn't something you just get. like a switch. You don't just become confident because someone told you that you're pretty or that you're talented or that you're smart. It's an accumulation over a period of time of multiple people telling you these things or getting all this information from multiple sources. It's like people like data, and our brains like data. And if one person tells you something, okay, fine, like maybe that's a fluke, maybe that's true, okay? But if 2 people tell you something, okay, there's a higher chance that is true. But then if like 50 people tell you something, then okay, maybe there's some validity to it. And that's what I really hope that people understand. If you have a neurodivergent loved one or someone, and honestly, someone with low self-esteem or low self-worth, a lot of the time that journey has to be taken by them as the individual, and there's not a lot that you can do to lift them up. And here's the thing, like 50 people could have told me that I was smart. I wasn't going to believe it until I started a podcast and started talking about things that I cared about and that I was knowledgeable about. And yes, like some of that is rooted in people and people recognizing that you do have something to offer in terms of your knowledge or your intelligence in that regard. But a lot of that came from me doing my research and finding sources and being like, oh, I know what I'm doing. Like I'm doing thorough work here. And also like I went to a top university, but like that's beside the point. It's like, I know what I'm doing. And sometimes it just takes you proving it to yourself over and over again. That being said, self-love is not going to raise you out of oppression. Self-love is not going to help you get into a relationship. I am so tired. Y'all, I am so tired of people saying that the reason you're not in a relationship right now, not that that's something to aspire to, but the reason that you're not successful or the reason that you're not doing da-da-da-da-da in your life right now is because you don't love yourself enough. I'm so tired of that. Like, do people understand that oppression is real? Do people understand that no amount of self-love, of self-care is going to raise you out of oppression? It's going to make the world love you? You can love yourself day in and day out, but if people are still passing laws that disenfranchise you, that make it hard for you to survive, what are we even talking about? Like, what are we even talking about? I want to acknowledge that self-love is not the answer to everything, but it is a way to sustain yourself when a system does not support you. Something that I never quite understood, or a notion that I don't quite understand still, is your experiences are valid. Because I've always interpreted, and it's probably just my autistic brain. Hold on. Not that my autistic brain is lesser than or doesn't function, quote, properly. It just functions differently, and the way that I understand language is different than the neurotypical person or the holistic person. That's it. Anywho, so the quote that I've never understood is, your experiences are valid. Because valid, what does valid even mean? Valid means real, right? Valid means it's almost fact, right? And I know good and well, everyone's experiences and everyone's perspectives are not rooted in fact. Like, there are people who are literally like, well, I guess Black people are dirt. Their experiences are not valid. Like, their perspectives are not valid. Like, we all have our own perspectives that are funneled through our traumas, through our own lens, through the way we walk through the world, through the way our brains work, okay? So everyone's experiences cannot be valid. What you experienced did literally happen, and it's like, of course it did. Of course what you experienced happened. But what does that tell you about how to interpret it? What does it tell you about how to deal with it? Absolutely nothing. So I've always found that phrase to be not helpful at all, because it's like saying, well, what happened happened. Your experiences are valid. Yes, of course. I'm not an idiot. Of course. What happened happened. Where does that leave you? So something that I like to go by is, two things can be true at the same time. Because what it's saying is, you have an experience, the other person who's in that whatever had an experience, another person from that same scenario has an experience. You might have two completely different experiences, but one of them is wrong. Like here's the thing, or maybe neither of them are right. Like, maybe they're both wrong. You know how there was always those shows or movies where it showed something from one character's perspective and then from the other character's perspective, and they were almost wildly different? Like, I don't remember what show this was, but it was like one of those like special episodes on like Disney or something, where one of the characters was like, I didn't eat the cookie from the cookie jar. Some scenario where they showed one person's perspective and someone was being like a bully to them, and then the other person's perspective is that person was being uber nice to them. Both experiences cannot be valid, because one of y'all's lying, one of y'all is not being honest, or neither of you. And here's the thing too, it's almost never either or perspective. It's almost always somewhere in the middle. But I wish people would just say that. Your feelings in that moment and the aftermath is real, like it exists. But what does that tell you about how to actually deal with that thing? And here's the thing, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just the person who's been in therapy, and my autistic brain has never been able to digest that statement. I wish that someone had told me though, that like, I am real, that like you, just because people don't see you doesn't mean that you don't exist. Like, I wish someone had said that, because that feels closer to what I think a lot of autistic people actually go through. You know what? I think I know how to fix this statement. I think it's not saying your experiences are valid. I think it's saying your experiences matter, or your experience mattered. Oftentimes we don't know that it matters or that it mattered until someone tells us. And if you're wondering, isn't that a really vulnerable position to be in? The answer is yes. The answer is absolute yes. We are very vulnerable to society and to society's rules and to other people. The way that we survive is through being identified by other people and being categorized by other people, because we do not know how to categorize ourselves. There's no roadmap for how to be in a relationship as an autistic person. There's no roadmap as to how to survive being ghosted as an autistic person. You just have to figure it out. And the only way you know that you figuring it out isn't completely out of line is by going by society's standards. And that can feel like you're trapped. You don't know how to move through social situations by your own accord. You don't know how to detect when someone is potentially an abuser. You don't know when to detect when someone is pretending to be your friend. You don't know when to detect who is safe. And the only way for you to distinguish who is safe from who is not is by going by the rules set before you. And those rules are twisted. The rules by society are twisted. But it's like we don't have an option. It's like there are no options. Because if we go by our own understanding of the world, we're going to slip up. Because the way that our brains work isn't the way that most of y'all's brains work. Neurotypical people's brains work. If you are not neurotypical, if you're not white, if you are not a size 2 and you're in a woman's body, if, a bunch of other things, if you do not appeal to the status quo, that pairing with having to navigate the world and survive, like, y'all know this. If you've been listening to me for a while, if you pick up an article every once in a while, you know that there are people that the world is not geared towards celebrating or elevating. Whew, that took a turn, y'all. I was just trying to highlight the fact that it makes sense for a neurodivergent person to feel unsafe, to feel unwanted, to not have a strong sense of self because they have built their sense of self on a means of survival. It makes sense. So if you are a neurodivergent person and you are listening to this, I hope that you're not going too hard on yourself for not understanding yourself sooner, for not getting a diagnosis sooner, because we know how hard and complicated and gate-kept that process is. I hope that you give yourself credit for making it this far. You have jumped over hurdles. You have crawled your way through in ways that most people wouldn't even imagine. And also, I hope that you understand that you don't exist solely to blend in or to make everyone else around you feel comfortable. Now that you know more about who you are and what you want, I really, really hope that you keep exploring those things, allowing them to ebb and flow with the current, devoid of shame or need for definition until they are ready to be defined. It is not your job to make people understand you. The time for accommodating people who should have been accommodating us is coming to a close. Of course, I'm talking about doing this in ways that don't jeopardize your safety or security, but you deserve to give the same energy that you were giving to understand them and understanding yourself. Congratulations on getting to this point and on surviving. That's all I have for y'all today. Please tune in bi-weekly for episodes about neurodivergent wellness, BIPOC wellness, and the agency that we have within pursuing creative equity. Stay weird. Bye.